Okay, so let's tackle a huge question today. What is the secret ingredient that makes psychotherapy actually work? What's the thing that makes the difference? The answer is probably not what you'd expect, so let's get right into it. Have you ever just had one of those moments, where everything feels like a bit too much? Where you feel stuck or overwhelmed or just off? So many of us think about getting some kind of support at times like these. But what really happens in therapy that makes things change?
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at some of the signs that it might be time to seek help. Then, we'll get into the single biggest secret to success in therapy. We'll define what researchers call the therapeutic alliance, check out the hard data that proves how powerful it is, and finally, we'll talk about what this all means for you.
All right, so first things first, who is therapy even for? I mean, how do you really know if it's the right step for you to take?
Well, research shows there are some pretty common situations where therapy can be a real game changer. For instance, if you're dealing with anxiety or just a low mood that doesn't seem to be going away, or if you're finding it really tough to cope after a big life event like a loss or some kind of trauma. Therapy can also be super effective for managing stress and burnout, or for those times when your relationships just feel stuck or constantly strained.
But let's say you decide to go. Once you're in that room, what is the active ingredient? What's the one thing that truly makes the biggest difference?
I mean, think about it. You've got cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic, humanistic. There are literally hundreds of different approaches out there. With all those options, you'd think one of them has to be the magic bullet, right? Or is there something else going on? Something deeper that kind of connects all of them? Well, after decades and decades of research, the answer is pretty fascinating. It's not the specific brand of therapy that matters most. Nope. Instead, the key is what scientists call a pan-theoretical factor. Basically, it's a powerful element that works across all successful therapies, no matter what specific theory they're based on.
So what is this big secret, this universal factor? Well, it's something called the therapeutic alliance. And really, it's all about the relationship.
To put it simply, the therapeutic alliance is all about the quality of the connection between you and your therapist. It's not about some silent expert just taking notes while you talk. It's about building a real partnership, one that's based on trust and collaboration. It's about two people genuinely working together to reach the same goal.
A researcher named Edward Borden broke this alliance down into 3 core parts. First, you've got to have an agreement on the goals. Like, what are you actually trying to achieve here? Second, there has to be a consensus on the tasks. How are we going to get there together? What are we going to do? And third, and this is the foundation for everything, is the bond. That feeling of trust, respect, and just knowing you're on the same team.
I know, that might sound a little abstract, so let's look at a real, translated transcript from a therapy session to see how a really skilled therapist actually puts this into practice.
So the session kicks off with the client seeing the therapist as the all-knowing expert who's going to provide a quick fix. And that's a really common way to start, right? But it's not a true partnership. Not yet.
But now, watch what the therapist does. They don't just dismiss the client's trust. They acknowledge it, they validate it, but then they gently pivot. They start to shift the whole dynamic from expert and patient to collaborators on a shared journey.
So a little later, the therapist suggests a technique, like a thought diary, and the client's reaction is blunt. They call it damned silly stuff. Okay, this right here, this is a huge moment. The client is pushing back. They're testing the connection.
And here's the genius move. The therapist doesn't get defensive. They don't say, hey, just do it. Instead, they repeat the client's own words back to them, damned silly stuff, which shows they're really listening and it validates the client's feeling completely. Then, they strengthen that bond by pointing out the humor in the moment. In that one instant, they turn a potential fight into a shared human connection. That is the alliance being built right there in real time.
Now that's a powerful example for sure. But is it just a nice story, or does the actual data back it up? Let's take a look at the numbers, and we're talking on a massive scale.
Researchers really wanted to know for sure, so they did what's called a meta-analysis, which is like a study of studies. They didn't just look at one or two, they gathered up the results from 295 separate independent studies.
And get this, across all those studies, they analyzed data from over 30,000 individual patients. This makes it one of the most solid, consistently proven findings in the entire field of psychotherapy research. It's a really big deal.
So what did they find? They found a consistently positive link between a strong alliance and successful outcomes. And it didn't matter what type of therapy it was, CBT, psychodynamic, you name it.
It was a powerful predictor for patients with all sorts of diagnoses, though maybe a little less so for substance use and eating disorders. It held true across different cultures and countries, and, this is so important for today, it was just as critical for therapy online as it was for face-to-face sessions. The alliance really is a universal key.
Okay, so we've seen the theory, we've seen a real-world example, and we've seen the undeniable data. So, what's the bottom line? What does this all actually mean for you?
Here's what I really want you to take away from all this. First, that relationship you have with your therapist isn't just some nice-to-have bonus. It's a primary ingredient for real change. Second, that relationship is all about working together and feeling genuinely heard and understood. Third, this isn't just someone's opinion. It is backed by tons of research on tens of thousands of people. And maybe the most important point of all, this knowledge empowers you. It means the single most important thing you can do is find a therapist who just feels like a good fit.
And that leaves us with one final thought. If we know that this human connection is the real engine of change in therapy, then the question isn't which therapy is best, but what's the first step you can take to find the right person you can truly connect with?